Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is extremely important. It is about the stabbing at Walmart. And I'll show you how it is definitively connected to the occult. Keep in mind, occultists tend to talk about Greek mythology, they tend to talk about the Bible, what have you. And so, when we look into Greek mythology, we see that things are very metaphoric. There's figurative speaking, there's parables, there's riddles, what have you. And so it is with the Bible. For example, in Revelation 16, we see that there's bowls that are poured out onto the earth. This is obviously figurative. There's not going to be a huge bowl in the sky being poured out onto the earth. Okay, the first bowl was poured on the land, and ugly, festering sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast, right? And they worshipped the beast's image. You have an idea of an image, right? This is something that takes some thinking. How do you know that the image is important? How do you know what they're getting at? How do you know these things? We have to look at it, and you have to analyze it, and you have to look throughout the Bible and say, what other things are connected to the idea of an image? So there's God's mark, and there's the mark of the beast. In fact, we go to Revelation 17, verse 5. It says, the name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Now, that's not the only time we see in the Bible where it talks about mysteries. Okay, at some point it says that the mystery of God will be accomplished. So the whole Bible is a mystery. The whole Bible is figurative. Therefore, the Bible has hidden meaning. An occultist to me is somebody who interprets the hidden meaning in a way that's similar to a witch or something, where a wise person looks at it and says, what does this mean? And he doesn't identify as an occultist. An occultist is basically a Satanist who looks for hidden meaning. That's how we see it being used in Western culture. So I'm not an occultist. I'm a wise man, and I've proven definitively that I'm the top martial artist ever possible. And who that makes me, I'll put it in the description so you won't get distracted from this video. So in Revelation 16, it talks about the bowls that are poured on the land and the water turns into blood, and blood like a dead person. The water stands for the Spirit. It stands for the peoples, the nations, the multitudes, and languages. We know that in Revelation 17, where it tells us flat out that that is the case. Okay, so it says the prostitute is sitting by many waters. And that, see, it's in verse 15 where it says, and the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. You see, it's figurative. Now, a lot of people look at Revelation and think it's, they think it's the only book that's figurative, but it's not. The whole Bible is figurative. They're stories with morals. Moses didn't actually split the Red Sea literally. He split what the Red Sea refers to. It refers to specific groups of people. It refers to specific nations and multitudes and languages and where they mix, and the migrations of people and specific characteristics of a specific spirit. In that case, it has to do with Egypt, first and foremost. So he split the Egyptian spirit. He turned them against him, divide and conquer, what have you. And that is a tactic the Romans used, and at one point the Romans made Christianity their official religion, and that's not a coincidence. They are very familiar with Greek mythology, and they had their Roman mythology. It is very much connected. And the Greeks were the first people in popular culture who translated the New Testament, as the story goes. And that's not a coincidence. The Bible talks about the lion pen of the scribes. So now what does this have to do with the stabbing at Walmart? Well, it took place in Traverse City, right? You talk about scripture, the Bible verse, right? The word traverse is a play on words for art verse. And there's the art of the occultist, who's like an artisan. An artisan is someone who deals in illusion. He's a craftsman. Okay, art and illusion. Okay, and kind of figurative paintings and sculptures. Sculptures that are trying to portray an idea that's figurative. They're trying to express a metaphor. They're trying to express an idea that has hidden meaning. An occulted idea, if you will. So when we look at the military is like a craft. The military industrial complex is an alliance of craftsmen and businessmen and engineers, you name it. And so they come together to run psychological operations on behalf of the governing class. And so that stabbing was an occult expression. It was an expression of the occult, of the Western occult. And keep in mind that all the globalists are sort of centered in the West. For example, China. Why do they wear a suit when they deal with people? Why do they go to work in a way that's very similar to the West? When they're Chinese, why aren't they proud of their culture? Why don't they have distinct Chinese architecture and distinct Chinese culture and distinct Chinese clothing? Because the occult is centered in the West. And when you think about it, if I was to say to you, hey, why does the president of China, right? Why do the leaders of China wear suits? Okay, can you give me a short and logical explanation? You would struggle to do so, right? You say, well, they just do. I don't know. Okay, because the reason is hidden. And it's a Western culture that you're seeing. And so the reason is a Western occult reason. They say that the ruling party in China is communist. Communism, okay, comes from Germany with Marx and Engels. So why do they have a Western political system while they're dressed in Western clothing? Because Satan, who's the god of this world, chose the West, right? The West are his chosen group. And in Western countries, basically, the dominant cultures are Judeo-Christian cultures. Now, what is Roman culture? It's basically a neo-Roman culture. What is Roman culture? Rome, who crucified Christ symbolically. Roman culture is neo-Babylonian culture, if that makes sense. We'll get to that. And Western culture, modern Western culture, is neo-Roman culture. So modern Western culture is neo-Babylonian culture, if you will. It's Babylonian culture. So if you were to trace the idea of why they're wearing suits, what culture is that, what spirit is that, to its root, you would get Babylon. And Babylon, through Rome, quote-unquote, civilized Europe. Thus, the idea of the rape of Europa. Well, if Zeus is said to rape Europe, right, the rape of Europa, in the form of a bull, right, the devil, the bull, then, why is that? Isn't Zeus from Greece? No, he's not from Greece. Not actually. In some versions, he's born in Crete, but he's really born from the outside. In fact, Dionysus, who is considered a young Zeus, is said to be the deity who comes from outside. He's a foreign deity who settles in Europe, right? Set, the god of evil in Egyptian mythology, like Apep, the other god of evil in Egyptian mythology. The two main gods of evil in Egyptian mythology are Set, who has many forms, and Apep, who basically has just two main forms, if I'm not mistaken here, a turtle, but his main form is a giant serpent. Okay. So, in order to understand the stabbing at Walmart in Traverse City, in Grand Traverse County, in Michigan, we have to understand the thinking, the philosophy, the ideology, the religion, if you will, of the state, the occult system of the state, which is a Babylonian system with a Western twist. Now, Babylon, by the time it established itself in Rome through the cult deities, right? Bel is the Middle Eastern or Mesopotamian equivalent to Zeus. And both their equivalents are Set in Egypt and Jupiter in Rome. Jupiter and Juno are based on Juju, which is West African witchcraft. And why that is, it's talked about in the Bible briefly when it says Ham begot Cush, Cush begot Nimrod. Nimrod founded Babylon. Nimrod was actually a righteous and mighty warrior for the Lord, it says in Genesis 10. If you connect it correctly. Okay, just like, at one point Jacob changed his name to Israel and was trying to do the right thing. Okay, and at the time was trying to do the right thing. God is talking to him, what have you. Same thing with Nimrod. But just like the Jews went astray in the Bible, so did the Babylonians and the people of Nimrod. And the Assyrians are even referred to as the people of Nimrod, which isn't quite the case because you have Cushites and Assyrians and other groups in Babylon. It's a story for another day. And Abraham is said to come from Chaldea, Ur, which is in Babylon. So what you're looking at with the stabbing, and maybe I should end this video here because I've given you a lot of information. Well, I'll actually end it with reading the first 7 scriptures or so, first 7 verses, that is, in Revelation 17, so you have a good understanding of what's going on here. So the stabbing that took place is a stabbing that's first and foremost understood by people who have a certain understanding of West African witchcraft, because that's what Babylon is based on. Then it changes form in Babylon, right? Because Nimrod wasn't there by himself. There was some people in his army who were bad guys, who were pagans, right? An army isn't, just like in the Bible with the Jews, right? Some of these guys aren't good guys. They come into a war spirit that's good, but they have, they're not perfect. And so they propounded their West African witchcraft there, right? Cush is south of Egypt. And West Africans are the bell that rings the loudest when it comes to sub-Saharan African. Just look at the population distribution and why that is, right? The migrations of people, okay, and how they migrated into South Africa and became the Zulu tribe. It's the same thing with the Middle East. They migrated into Northeast Africa, right? Or they're there already. There's different ways to look at it. And they migrated from there into the Middle East, into Babylon, and founded it with West African martial arts, okay, Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, to be precise. We see that in Job. We see that in Genesis 10, Amos 9:7. It's a story for another day. Okay, so therefore these people are kind of mimicking, or there's a kind of cultural appropriation. Again, I'm not a witchcraft person. I despise witchcraft. Okay, and that cultural appropriation extends into Greece, and they use that to civilize, right? It's a cult, a culture, a cult civilization, a culture-based civilization. Okay, and that culture that it's based on is first and foremost African, right? Sub-Saharan African, black African. Secondly, it's Babylonian, Middle Eastern, Mesopotamian, right? Babylonian. Okay, then it is Cretan and Greece. The Crete and Greece. Greek. Then it's Roman. Okay, and then as Rome extends, it occupies England for several hundred years, occupies all over Europe. Okay, and that culture spreads, especially with the Catholic Church and the confessionalism, where people had to confess their loyalty to a culture which is based in West African witchcraft. In fact, the word church comes from the word Circe. It's a play on words for Circe, and Circe is a deity of witchcraft, like Hecate in Greek mythology. Greco-Roman, really. So then the governing class has this sort of Babylonian religion, is what they would describe it as, and that's how the authors of the Bible describe it, right? It's mystery Babylon. It's a mystery why they're so greedy. It's a mystery why, they don't treat people more fairly. It's a mystery why they don't end homelessness. Well, the mystery is a Babylonian mystery. If you trace it back to its roots in West African witchcraft, it's very much about certain things. It's about social order. It's about responding to the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order and rebelling against it, right? Amos 9:7, are you not the same as the Cushites unto me, O children of Israel? It's why, so many preachers play stupid about the African origin of humanity, because it points to a figurative story that points to black African martial art, a black African martial art order, and not a literal story which points to anyone who would claim to be Jews and throws their weight around enough and says, hey, we're Jews. In fact, the word Jew is based on juju, witchcraft. Straightforward. No other way it can be. Jew, Jupiter and Juno, Juju, and Jews. Okay, so excuse me, it's Juju for witchcraft, Jupiter and Juno, where you also get Juju, and the Jews, who are mixed with black no matter how you slice it. Look at Moses and his Cushite wife. Look at, the migrations of people no matter how you slice it. Okay. So let's look at Revelation 17, and let's quickly and define the difference between the people who are really of the synagogue of Satan and people who obey God through me, whether they're Jew or Gentile. At this point, nobody is doing so. But my parents are blameless for bringing me into this world. It's a story for another day. Let's get to it. Revelation 17, Babylon, the prostitute on the beast. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. Now, the 7 bowls have to do with the 7 seals, sealing people in hell for 7 sins. 7 abominations that fill their hearts, as what the Bible says. So it's a transformation. Right? It's like a magic spell. They're bowls that are being allowed, they're allowed to be poured on the earth. Right? These are not angels blessing people. These are angels working with demons in a sense to transform the earth into hell. That's why Paul says Jerusalem in the sky, the Jerusalem with God, is the true Jerusalem, not Jerusalem in this world. Jerusalem where the martial art order traverses is the true Jerusalem. Not where the church waves a magic wand and dresses up like it's Lord of the Rings or something, where churches, mosques, and synagogues look like magicians or something, but the Jerusalem of the martial art order, right? Exodus 15:3, the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. The Lord is not a magic arts person. In Revelation it says outside the gates are the sorcerers. Inside the gates are those in the warrior order of God, which Genesis 10 shows us is a Royal African Falcon martial art order, because the first pronounced warrior leader in the Bible is a Cushite. And the kingdom of heaven is taken away from the Jews and given to a people that will do its works. And Amos 9:7 tells us who it is. It's the Cushites, but it's not all black people. It's a certain type of black person, and I'm really the only one who's showing those characteristics. After my flesh dies, no one should reproduce no matter what. That's the end of the story. I am the Messiah. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. You'll see that I'm right. So again, one of the seven angels who had the 7 bowls, which is like the word bowl, right, came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." Now in this day and age we have more like government officials. There's not so much kings in the earth, right? There's government officials. So the kings of the earth are the governments and anyone else who's exerting power in a way that's similar to a king who's of the earth. Key phrase, of the earth. And that's everybody who's trying to exert power right now except for me, who's trying to exert power in a way that would define them as a king, as a modern king in their own right. So again, with her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Now, she's figurative, and in some ways she's literal in that some people embody the idea of a Jezebel, of a prostitute, of a harlot, of a whore. Someone who's culturally rebelling against God and the accompanying sexual activities that may or may not occur. So one doesn't have to be a prostitute to be a prostitute. Okay? One just has to cheat me out of my right to lead to be prostituting themselves to other ideas, to other little g gods, instead of the one true God with the big G. And I'm not referring to the G in Freemasonry. Just referring to, I don't speak in the occult languages. I just tell you the truth, which is much greater than being an occultist. So then the angels carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, so those heads and horns stand for kings. The 7 heads stand for kings and hells, where they worship certain deities. Okay. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So the gold stands for wisdom, first and foremost. The precious stones stand for the stones that they're building their pagan temples with that are precious to them. And the pearls, right, the word pearl has the word rape scrambled into it. It stands for their kingdom, right? The kingdom of heaven is like someone who buried a pearl, or someone who, sold everything to have a precious and rare pearl, right? So what did people commit to? So that's from one of the parables in the Bible, by the way. What did people commit to? That's what they think is their precious pearl and their precious stones. What kind of wisdom, right? Do they have worldly wisdom or divine wisdom? That's what they think is their gold, right? A king's supposed to be wise. He's supposed to be a righteous, wise warrior king, really. Warrior in his own right, standing firm. She held a golden cup in her hand. That cup stands for Jerusalem. That cup stands for Babylon. We see that in the Old Testament. Filled with abominable things and the filth of her adultery. So her ways, her paths, her way of thinking. So it's saying all the governments, all the nations in the world, according to this, we'll say, to not break the rules on YouTube, are said to be filthy. They're said to be, worshiping things other than God. Okay, so her cup, her nation, and Babylon covers the whole world, mind you, right? The kings of the earth committed adultery with the whole world, filled with the abominable things and filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead instead of the name of God, right? It's a mystery, right? The way, the truth, and the life, right? The truth must come to the light, declaring the Spirit of God openly like I am, versus being in some secret society or some church secret society behind the scenes or whatever, covering up who I am instead of debating me publicly. Those are the actions of the mystery schools of Babylon, okay, in their modern form, and that's evil. The name written on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Now, there's some wordplay there that's very key here, but I'm running out of time here. I went way over time, so let me just wrap this up. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Okay, so we'll stop there. So, she's drunk with the blood of God's holy people. Now, this gets a little bit tricky. In the Walmart stabbing, if I'm not mistaken, nobody died. In a lot of these shootings, people die. But who's being killed? It's not God's holy people. Okay, in the sense that these people had a potential to obey God through me, and those who were killed didn't when all is said and done. Okay, that potential, right? They killed that potential. They killed the spirit, kind of the angel on their shoulder trying to reason with them, disappears, time's up, they're done. Okay, but what it's referring to is the process, right? The wine, right? It's processed fruits. The process of processing fruits that are adverse to the Spirit of God. Their works, their ways, their paths, their way of thinking, their state of being, their mentality, their dating, their reproductive cycle, their marriages, their friends, their family, who they commune with, their community, right? That's what it's talking about. So it's saying it's drunk. They're drunk with their culture that is part of the greater Babylonian process of killing God's people. And so when these people die in these shootings, it's very tragic, it's sad, but they're not God's people. And that's part of the process, right? It's superimposed on killing God's people. It's superimposed on the idea of an innocent victim being killed. But if you're cheating the most righteous person that ever lived out of his right to lead, okay, because you come from a culture that is spiritually negligent, on a divine level, criminally negligent, okay, then you're not going to heaven. The offspring of the wicked will perish, even if they don't know that I'm here right now. They have to repent, and they're not doing that. So there's so many tragedies that occur when these things occur. And these people are people who are cunning, right? The snake is defined as crafty, right? Cunning, crafty, the craft, masonry, and everything like it, which is like everything these days. Except for my culture, which is universal, pinpointed, moral precision. Well, I'm going way out of my way to precisely explain this to you, which is what it takes for you to understand the difference between right and wrong, right? The devil's in the details. I've pinpointed him. I pierced him and say, he's wrong, I'm right. Now, are you going to get pierced with him? Or are you going to come into the gate and enter God's Spirit? The truth hurts. It saddens me to have to point out that every day 189,000 people die and they go to hell. But who is here and who isn't? Right now, the earth could be full with 10 billion people who are all righteous. Instead, there's 8 billion people and only 3 are righteous. What the hell do you call that? After them and their groups screened out the righteous, and when the colonists came, they refused to fight to the death. They had no divine purpose. At least by this point is clear. We see the technologies and everything. Why, when the colonists came, didn't the people, the indigenous peoples of the world, fight to the death? They weren't from the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. They didn't have some kind of divine reason to be here. Because they have it in their hearts and souls to be fair weather. I'm not saying this to insult them. The white Jew and LGBT people are the main groups who colonized the planet and did wrong. I'm not being racist here, just telling the truth. But I'm trying to help you understand why 189,000 people die every day and go to hell and not heaven. It's been a long time since someone died and went to heaven. Now why? Generational ill-gotten gains. Why? Their culture, their cultivation, their ways, their paths, their deeds. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not the broad path to destruction on a church. Excuse me, in a world where there's hundreds of thousands of churches all over the world. If they were the narrow way, why are there hundreds of thousands of them? Why are there like almost 3 billion people or 2.5 or whatever it is these days that argue that they're Christians? And there's another like 1.7 billion that say that they're Muslims. And there's who knows how many people that say that they're Jews. It's over half of this planet. Over half the people on this planet argue that they're Christian, Muslims, or Jews, or in another monotheistic grouping that is very similar to their Abrahamic faiths. Not a single one of them has the heart to publicly debate me about it. What can they say? They're afraid of what the devil would do? That's the opposite of carrying your cross. That's anti. Well, what can they say? The reason why they refuse to debate me publicly is because it's clear that I'm right. They know they're neo-colonial hypocrites. They know that the controlled opposition groups that they point at the other guys saying they're the colonists are also neo-colonial hypocrites. It's a left-right paradigm. And that includes every church on the planet. They fall in somewhere on the political spectrum. They're mere political centers. And they all worship the devil as such. They administer spiritual poison with their ministry as ministers. When they tell you to pray, they're really preying on your spirit and your soul. That's why the word pray is like the word pray. Their false image of Christ is said to be Serapis, whose name is a play on words for rapes is. What is rape? Rape is also rape by deception when a bunch of scum lie to you about what matters most, and you date in a way that reflects that you've fallen into their trap, that you believe their lie. Just because you don't believe the most obvious of their lies doesn't mean you haven't believed the more subtle lies and committed to a lifestyle that is a sick joke. That's why the word life starts with the word lie. The word live is evil spelled backwards. And the word parent has the word rape scrambled into it because you're a sucker that betrays God, and I'm not.